Good morning, everybody. My name is Leslie Ann Johnson. Welcome to this morning's press conference being facilitated by the Royal Grenada Police Force. We're trying to keep it as short and tight as possible this morning. And we have with us Deputy Commissioner of Police, Mr. Franklin Redhead. He'll be doing a presentation. We're talking this morning about the emergency regulations. We also have with us ACP Jessamine Prince and the Superintendent Vanny Kerwin, no stranger to this place. So as I mentioned, we're talking this morning about the emergency regulations. We'll have a brief presentation from Deputy COP Mr. Franklin Redhead, after which we will take your questions. Mr. Redhead, good morning.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie Ann, and good morning to the listening public. Certainly as part of the ongoing process of keeping everyone appraised of how the regulation changes from week to week, certainly pursuant to that, the RGPF would like to take this opportunity to brief on the new emergency powers regulations that recently was published or broadcast, number 19, and to discuss briefly what has changed, what remains the same, and how we can go forward in terms of collaboration. First of all, we all know very well that the curfew has been lifted, so freedom of movement throughout the state of Grenada is now permitted without any restriction as obtained in the past. The second point I'd like to raise is the issue of beaches being open. There are no current restriction on beaches in terms of time limits, and certainly I believe that is a welcome news for everyone, including myself. What has remained the same essentially in terms of the new emergency powers regulation is the need to continue to wearing the mask in public places, as well as maintaining the social distancing protocols and the sanitization protocols. Section 2 speaks to this issue very well in terms of every person, whenever is outside of their place of residence or about to enter a building or in any public space, is required to wear a mask or a suitable face covering as appropriate. The operation of specialized businesses or specified businesses and establishments that were obtained, that has the permissions to operate, continue to remain in effect. Those businesses that have not had permission as yet will have to obtain permission to do so. And I imagine as we go forward, there'll be more easing of this as we move closer to some level of normalcy going forward. So the major issue, certainly coming out of the new emergency powers regulations number 15, really is the issue of the curfew being lifted, beaches being reopened unlimited, the continued need for face covering in public spaces, and of course the restrictions on funerals and weddings still remain in terms of the 50 persons limit. Also, social gatherings or social gatherings of any nature is still limited to 20 persons as stipulated within the regulation. The obligation on businesses to maintain both within their spaces and outside in the immediate environs of their space distancing protocols as well as sanitizing protocols still remain in effect. And certainly in the context of how this pans out in terms of enforcement, we all know very well that these are ticketable offenses as articulated within the emergency powers regulations. We are now moving to codify some protocols that were already discussed vis-a-vis how public transportation can be better effected, and Mr. Prince will discuss those. And certainly this is my opening salvo in terms of our purpose here this morning, and certainly I want to pass this on to Mr. Prince now to discuss the issue of the buses protocol, and then we're happy to feed your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy, and good morning to everyone. It's another great opportunity to be with you this morning. As Deputy said, we have been discussing the protocols for the operations of public transportation, and let me hasten to say here that public transportation here includes now the motor omnibuses, hiring cars, and taxis. This has always been the designation of public transport in the regulations, But we seem to have been focusing in the last few weeks, perhaps months, on buses, motor omnibuses. And we've discussed with them some protocols and some guidelines that will give effect to the operations of buses. What we are doing in this week coming is to make those more to give more force to the recommendations and the guidelines that was set forth. While in the past there were no penalties for failing to comply with some of the guidelines that were issued, in this week coming up, we will see that being a little more forceful by way of making them punishable by ticket. And I say that to emphasize the point that the Commissioner of Police, in discussion with the Cabinet, will make or has the authority to make guidelines to give effect to the operations of buses and other public transportation systems like hiring cars and taxis. And so what we are going to do, and it's just a word of advice to our operators, we have been talking about this for the last weeks and perhaps months, and we are asking now that these are going to become more seriously applicable to the operations of these buses. As we continue to see the easement and the lifting of more restrictions, the practicing of those protocols and hygiene practices are becoming more necessary for us to be able to be in a position where we can have some semblance of protection against the COVID-19 virus. So you will be seeing, and we will be engaging again further with some of the stakeholders on this matter, just to ensure that there's no one left in understanding that as we go forward, those will become more forceful in terms of the application. So that's it for me for now.
Thank you, gentlemen. So, colleagues, you've heard from Deputy COP Franklin Redhead as well as ACP Jesmond Prince. We now open the floor for questions. In the meantime, while it was mentioned, the COP Redhead, in terms of social gathering, the number remains at 20. Maybe you should just clarify for those who may have ideas that major shows can take place because the curfew has been lifted and things have been eased a bit.
And that is one of the misunderstandings that we need to clarify, that while the curfew has been lifted, there has been no lifting of the restrictions on social gathering. The number remains 20 for any kinds of social gathering. So things such as barbecues, street jams, major shows and so forth has not been approved as yet because of the fact that obviously they would exceed the stipulated limit of 20 persons. So while there is some easing of restrictions, some restrictions remain to ensure that we mitigate further spread of the infection throughout the state, or the potential spread of this infection throughout the state.
Colleagues, anybody as yet? ACP Prince, maybe you can go into a bit more detail. As you mentioned, you will be more forceful this week as to what people can expect, just so that they are clear and they don't say, okay, well, I was not aware of this or that.
Okay. We, in discussion with the bus operators, and I target the bus operators mostly because these are the ones who we were mainly in contact with. We have not really spoken to the taxi operators and the hiring vehicle operators. But we've been speaking with the bus operators in most of our engagements in the last few weeks and months. And what we have been saying, and we have also been saying to the public, is that you cannot enter a bus without wearing your mask and without being sanitized. And we've had some resistance in the past where persons may refuse to be sanitized. And that being said, while a person may refuse the sanitization that is provided by the bus operator, they can actually use their own sanitization, but it has to be to the satisfaction of the bus operator. So he or she may require to examine the liquid or the substance that is used by that individual to ascertain that it meets the requirement to be constituted as being sanitized. So you can't say, okay, I'm going to sanitize myself, I have my own stuff, and it does not meet the basic health requirement. So that is the authority that the bus operator has to determine whether or not the sanitization is up to the standard that is required. If you refuse, the bus operator has the right to refuse you on the bus. Also, the wearing of masks on the bus, you do not have an excuse not to wear your mask on the bus. And despite the fact that you may hear people saying that they have breathing problems, if you have a breathing problem, this is something that you want to check out before you actually board a public transportation. I think the law is clear that it says that if you have any flu-like symptom, you want to stay at home and not go on a bus. So there is no provision for a person not wearing a mask on the bus with other persons wearing the mask on the bus. So you have to comply with that. Failure to do so will result in you being ticketed. And also the bus operator making a determination to have you disembark. And we are even bringing this further and making it now regulations that if you were forced out of the bus or asked to disembark the bus, having paid your fare to get to where you want to get, and middle in the route you fail to observe or practice all of these protocols, and having to be asked to disembark the bus, the possibility exists that you can forfeit the fare that you would have paid up front. So this is serious, and we want persons to cooperate and work along with the police and the bus operators to ensure that they practice what is required by now, as we say, law. We also have the issues where the bus operators may refuse to practice the same protocol, and they too will be subjected to being ticketed or being charged for the offense of failing to comply or failing to practice, whether it's social distancing, physical distancing, or the wearing of the mask or sanitization. All of these now will become punishable under regulations.
Maybe you can just remind us, ACP Prince, of the time frame that a ticket must be paid once you're ticketed or fined.
The ticket is 31 days. Upon receipt of the ticket, you have 31 days to pay the ticket. Failure to do so, the matter will be brought to court, wherein you might be required to pay more if found guilty in the court. So you have a fare, the fares or the minimum ticket, the fare of the ticket is $500. However, the maximum is $1,000, and the $1,000 can be imposed if you are found guilty in the court. If you pay $500 before going to court, then the matter is not going to be taken to court, and there will be no record against you. But if you go to court and found guilty, then that will be recorded against you in your criminal record.
Thank you. Superintendent Cohen, we know there was an issue in Guelph over the weekend. How challenging is it for the force to have to deal with a situation like that? Based on all that has already been said, we know there's been easement, the curfew has been lifted and all that. So people are generally going back to what you call like a normal pre-COVID state. How do you deal with that, or what measures can you take to ensure that situations like that don't crop up if that's possible? Taking into consideration there was no social distancing, some people were not wearing masks and all that. So people were basically not adhering to some of the protocols that we want to keep in place for the time being.
Thank you very much, Les, and good morning to the listening and viewing public. It will always be a challenge having to deal with our people, having regard to the fact that we are very festive population. As you indicated, we have seen quite a number of persons that go off on over the weekend who were not wearing masks, who were not adhering to the 6 feet social distancing. But we understand that it was a protest, and in that case, a lot of these rules were set aside. That doesn't necessarily make it right. But we understand that going forward, though, as the country opens up, as the curfew is now lifted, we do expect that a number of activities will take place. People will use the opportunity to do things that are not open for them to do. What we can do from law enforcement is to do what we have always done: be vigilant. Our patrols are out there. We pay attention to what is happening in the country and take the necessary action when we need to, providing the necessary guidance and advice to people. It is never the intention of the RGPF to ticket. Mr. Prince was making the point. It is never the intention of RGPF to be high-handed or forceful in, the way we enforce the regulations. But we have a job to do, and we are going to do that job without fear, favor, malice, or ill will. But we'll do it, this kind of humane way, as we have been doing it over the last couple of months, by making sure that we engage with the population, making sure that they understand, and where needs be, we do what we need to do.
Thank you very much. Linda Straker, good morning. You have questions?
I think Mikey has been putting his hand up before me, so I will give him the opportunity.
Mikey, my apologies. I didn't see you. Go ahead, Mikey. Good morning.
Good morning to you, and good morning to the officers on the panel. All right, so we are speaking of social gatherings and 20 persons being allowed at any one time. So I am at an event, and I've been there. I was the 10th person to arrive. And some other people decides to come on and becomes number 23, 24, 25, 26. What do I do as someone who believes that I have not violated any law, that I have been there, and I arrived at that event early enough?
Mikey, good morning. It doesn't matter at what position you arrive at the event. The law clearly says that no one should host or attend an event in excess of 20. So when that count is made and it is over 20, every person who is in that event is liable to be charged under the Act. So my advice to you is, if you arrive at number 10, realizing that the number has passed 20, I would say to you, if you're smart enough, you should leave. Because if you remain in the event and the event is beyond the numbers, everyone attending that event is now liable to be charged.
I will add that there's an obligation on the host to ensure that whatever event is staged, that you keep it within the limits, the prescribed statutory limits.
Thank you. Mikey, do you have another question?
Yes. As it relates to recreational or sporting activities, does the law see or treat it differently from social activities in terms of the numbers and so on?
Well, a social activity is a social activity, whether sporting or other kind. If you're going to play any kind of sporting activity, again, the limit which is prescribed in the statute, in the regulation, has to be adhered to. So whether it is soccer, cricket, or any other activity of a social nature, it must fit within the stipulated regulations of not more than 20 persons who participate in that particular activity.
That's it, Mikey, or you have another? You're good. Linda?
Go ahead.
All right, thanks. Linda, go right ahead.
Good morning to all. My question is going back to the question about golf, but it's not to do with the crowd. But last night, we would have received a statement from the attorney for the family, which said that, he said, and I'm going to read it as was sent, I am highly disturbed and quite alarmed, as with any member of the Grenadian public, to learn that the bullet which was fired by the policeman this past Sunday into the upper leg of young Jamal Charles was a hollowed point bullet that is ordinarily used by military forces, not by police officers. What's the comment from the hierarchy of the force to that claim by the lawyer for Mr. Charles?
Well, that claim, as far as I know, is completely false. The RGPF does not have any hollow point ammunition in its inventory, and we have not had a practice or a tradition of using hollow point ammunition within our inventory. From my knowledge, and certainly from the evidence that has been presented, the ammunition used was a conventional warhead, as is established within our protocols, that is used routinely for RGPF operations. So this is a complete falsehood, and I believe it is purely to direct or misinform the public in a particular direction.
Do you have another one, Linda?
Yes, thanks. Just going back to the sanitizers and the wearing of masks. Recently, I would have seen news out of the US where focus was on the standard and the type of sanitizers that can be used. I know here we are saying that it has to be, I think, over 70% alcohol. Who is ensuring that the standards that is used for the public transport is really of the quality that is acceptable here? Because there are evidence that persons have shown allergic reaction to some sanitizers for whatever reason.
Okay, well, what I know is that the Ministry of Transportation is providing a lot of the sanitization liquid for most of the public transport system. And I am of the view that those are the standard type of sanitization that is used and approved by the Ministry of Health. To determine if sanitization that is not provided by the ministry, whether it meets the requirement, that is something that will come into question. If it is raised, then of course that will be taken to the ministry to examine and determine whether it meets the standard. If not, then the person can be held responsible.
All right, Linda, do you have any other question?
Not for now. I see Mikey is alerted.
Mikey, go right ahead. If you have another question, go ahead.
Okay, good morning again. Now, as it relates to the shooting incident in Guelph, the attorney has been very vocal and has presented a version of the family of the incident. What are the facts surrounding that case as reported or so far has been seen by the Royal Grenada Police Force, so that at least we have a better appreciation for the incident and what has happened?
Well, thank you, Mikey, for that question. The RGPF has promised an unbiased, fair investigation into the issue. And at the culmination of our investigation, our findings will be presented to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, which is an independent state authority to evaluate the veracity of what has been said or what has transpired. I would add that I would not further fuel the flames of the narrative that is out there in terms of looking at this issue from only a single perspective, but I will wait until the results of the investigation has been completed, certainly to provide clarity on this issue going forward. But I must also hasten to add that I would be first in line. I believe I'll be second because Commissioner will be first, to challenge any police officer who have acted out of character, certainly in the context of not fulfilling the obligations of being a true police professional, by certainly violating the public trust, by not having the requisite professional maturity to wear this badge or to be a police officer. So I'll be first in line to do so. But I would not, under any circumstances, throw any officer under the bus purely to fulfill the narrative that is circulating without rooted in evidence, without rooted in the truth. And certainly this is the course of action that the RGPF has taken consistently, and that is what is going to happen going forward relative to this investigation. We will investigate. We have promised to do so. We will do so fairly. We will send those results on to the Director of Public Prosecution for his assessment, and whenever the decision lies in terms of action, certainly with the RGPF will follow through in terms of its own obligation under the statutes.
Mikey, any other?
Not for now.
Okay, great. So I want to, gentlemen, I just want people to be clear again as we've gone through what is happening from now. Deputy Redhead, operations of businesses that are already there. So we know those are there. But those without permission must obtain permission. Now, we don't want anybody to say I wasn't aware, especially since things have now eased and sort of gone back to normal. So let us help them to understand what is expected of you, even though it seems as though times are normal.
And again, to restate, certainly in my opening salvo, those businesses that have the permissions to operate can operate as certainly operate with normal hours. Normal hours being what is relative to their kind of business. So certainly the easing of that has happened. Those businesses who have not yet been granted permission must seek permission to do so, to operate. The consideration for that will happen at the higher level in terms of the COVID Cabinet Subcommittee, and it will naturally cascade down to the RGPF to effect it. So that is the procedure in terms of how this process pans out, and certainly it will be applied justifiably so going forward in terms of other businesses who are required to open to conduct their business as per normal.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, anybody else with questions? Now's your time, please. Let's do it.
There's a question from MTV in the chat.
All right, can you read it for us, Mikey?
Okay, it says, how concerned following Sunday's event is the RGPF about the climate with regards to protest action or the uprising of the people, taking into consideration the happenings around the world, including neighboring Trinidad?
Certainly, while there is certainly a strong undercurrent of resentment happening in the international forum, I think we have to be guided by a sensible approach in Grenada, even if we have issues that we feel that we need to vent about. I think the construct within which we do this is important to ensure that we don't burn bridges, and remembering the fact that we all serve the same master, which is Grenada. So while we may want the same things and we may disagree on the way of approaching this, certainly the sensible approach is what I would advise in terms of venting your frustration, venting your anger, or venting your dissent. And there are avenues for doing this, and doing this safely and consistently to ensure that it does not violate anyone's privileges or does not undermine certainly the peace and stability of the country going forward. And this is that will be my comment on the issue.
Thank you, Mikey. Thank you so much for your assistance. Linda, you have another question?
Yes, my question had to do with the granting of permission for businesses. Where is the granting of permission? Can any one of them explain whether that permission is permission in sector or individual business permission? So, for example, we are allowed to have social event of up to 20. If, for example, I want to use a caterer, how would I know that this caterer is approved to operate? Is there a list listed somewhere that we can go to? Explain the granting of permission for me, please. And I think a lot of people really want to understand that more deeply.
The granting of permission for business to operate, and there has been a gradual reopening of businesses coming out of the March situation when we have been, there's a total lockdown. Certainly that falls within the purview of the Cabinet Subcommittee. Their considerations factor in many variables in terms of why businesses are open at particular times, the risk factors in terms of businesses opening at particular times going forward. So I imagine that those considerations will still hold sway in terms of determining which businesses are open going forward, the likely risks to patrons, and not only to patrons but to the general population as well, and how that impacts everything else in terms of our mitigation efforts and strategies at the national level. The listing of businesses, I cannot say definitively whether or not there is a listing of businesses that have been open, but within the Act enshrined, it stipulates which businesses can be open. So you can read that in your own time, Linda. It informs as to how this matter is progress going forward.
If I could just add, and to advise Linda that it is listed in Regulations 5. It says operations of specified establishment and businesses, and there is listed a number of businesses, as you say, in various categories that are allowed to operate. However, those that are not listed, whether it is an individual or a group of individuals desiring to do an event, then an application is required.
Let me just follow up on part of the question that she has asked as to whether or not permission needs to be granted to sector or to individual businesses. Obviously, each individual business will have to make an application because there is a vetting or a process by the Ministry of Health to ensure that each establishment meets the requirement. So even if it says restaurants are opened, that doesn't necessarily mean that you do not have to apply and have your place be inspected by the ministry in compliance and in keeping with the regulation. So it's not necessarily by sector, but individual businesses in a sector needs to be looked at by the ministry to determine whether or not they can meet the relative requirements.
Thank you, gentlemen, colleagues. It seems as though we're winding down. You have a minute to ask any question anybody may have. All right, it seems as though we have exhausted all. There's another one. MTV. All right, let me just get this quickly. All right, so MTV is asking, the DPP has the final say with regards to investigation of the police officers. However, the information given to the DPP will be gathered by the said police officers.
Certainly, the DPP's office is an independent state authority, and if they are dissatisfied with what is presented to them, they can do their own investigations. They can call to see certain witnesses. They can call in anyone that they wish to see to clarify issues. So it's not a done deal on the basis of the police presentation. The DPP is an independent state authority, and they can call witnesses. They can verify facts in their own right as appropriate.
All right, colleagues, thank you very much, gentlemen. I'll give you the opportunity to say any parting words you may have. I think they've exhausted all their questions.
Something that I have been paying attention to in recent days that particularly concerns me, and not only concerned me as a police officer, but concerned me as a former prosecutor. I have noticed that there's quite a lot of publicity, of matters that are under investigation by one side or by parties representing sides of that investigation. Now, as a police force, we cannot or we do not have the authority to tell anybody what they could and cannot say in public. But I think it's a dangerous precedent we are setting when we set our people up to expect a particular narrative or a particular outcome ahead of an investigation. Because at the end of the day, we do not know what will come out of any situation. We do not know how the court will treat with any particular matter that is before the court. But when we try these matters in public and we sway a section of our population down a particular path, and God forbids the court does not adhere to what the narrative that is out there, you can see how dangerous that can be with the expectation of our people. So while we cannot say don't do it, I think there needs to be a level of caution here as to what we play out in the public, particularly matters that are under investigation or matters that are heading to court. Trials are for the courts, and we should all let the court make that decision. Matters that are sub judice, meaning that matters are before the court, must be given a chance to go to the court to be determined and not determined in the public, because there can be significant slippery slopes in doing that. So it's just a word of advice, even if we do not have the authority to say to anyone, don't do it.
Well, just to advise and to remind persons that in going forward, the wearing of masks has become now even more forceful. The sanitization, the physical distancing, all of those now are becoming more and more forceful as we go forward. So just a reminder that you will be checked on those things.
Well, my colleague officers stole my thunder, but I just want to reemphasize what I was going to say. In the context that we're here today in Grenada at a place where we are more comfortable in terms of the strategies that have been deployed in terms of mitigation. And we need to, and as we move closer to a reopening of our borders, and I am seeing in some forums the discussion that is happening in that regard. It is critically important that we all understand the importance. In fact, the wearing of masks in public spaces has to assume new importance. If we're going to go the route of opening borders, if we're going to have more openings, if we're going to have more easing of restrictions, naturally our individual protocols in terms of mitigation has to have primacy. And this will be my parting words. Wear your mask. It is critically important that you do so because it affects everything. Everything is connected. Individually and collectively as a people, we should ensure that we adhere to these protocols because it makes sense. And certainly, simple logic will tell you that for every case that is reported, there are likely to be, statistically, there are likely to be unreported asymptomatic cases. We don't know. So it's a known unknown. And the only mechanism we have in terms of dealing with that scenario is to wear our masks and wear it consistently. And I know even in the police force we have some challenges with it, and we are moving to correct this. But certainly that should not negate anyone from following through with national protocols that will assist you individually and assist us as a country going forward. I thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Very good parting words. Colleagues, we do thank you so very much for being with us today. Deputy Commissioner Franklin Redhead, ACP Jesmond Prince, and Superintendent Vanny Cohen. It has been a pleasure having you here with us today. Colleagues, once again, thank you so much. Everybody have a great day. My name is Leslie Ann Johnson.